For decades, the world operated on a pretty simple premise when it came to the relationship between the United States and China. But that entire foundation is now crumbling. So today, we are diving deep into the massive shift that's literally reshaping our world, what's being called the Great Decoupling. For years, the guiding idea was something called Chimerica. It was this really powerful theory that the economies of China and the US were so tangled up, so interwoven, that they had basically become one giant economic entity. The logic, right, was pretty straightforward. You just don't go to war with your biggest customer or your most important supplier.
But here's the thing. That fundamental premise, the very idea that kept the global order humming for a whole generation, well, it's dead. The era of assuming economic ties would always prevent a major conflict is officially over.
So if that's gone, what's taken its place? We've sort of stumbled into this new and pretty uncertain phase. A lot of people are calling it a cold peace. It's this period of intense, almost quiet rivalry, where two former economic partners have become full-blown global competitors. And now they're each in a race to see who will define the rest of this century.
And that brings us to the main arena for this new conflict. And you should probably forget what you might imagine when you think of superpower showdowns, because the #1 battlefield today isn't on the high seas, it's on the motherboard, it's on the circuit board.
This whole chip war is really being fought with two completely different strategies. On one side, the US is going with this high fence around a small yard policy, basically trying to wall off its most cutting-edge AI chip technology from China. And on the other side, Beijing is hitting the accelerator on its self-reliance campaign, just pouring billions and billions of dollars into building its very own domestic chip industry from the ground up.
But China has a really powerful card of its own to play here, and that is an absolute chokehold on what are called rare earth elements. They control a staggering 80% of the entire world's refined supply, and these are the fundamental building blocks of almost all modern technology.
And why does that 80% figure matter so much? Well, because without these materials, the modern world just grinds to a halt. We're talking no batteries for electric vehicles, no wind turbines for clean energy, and it even means no F-35 fighter jets to project military power. It is a massive, massive strategic vulnerability for everyone else.
So all of this intense competition is forcing this global scramble, and it's effectively splitting the world into two separate tech blocks. The US is trying to friendshore. That means moving its critical supply chains to allied countries like India and Vietnam. And at the exact same time, China is busy building its own parallel ecosystem through its really ambitious Digital Silk Road initiative.
And this right here is where this whole tech rivalry gets truly explosive, because it all inevitably leads us to the most volatile part of the story. If technology is the engine of this new rivalry, then the island of Taiwan, well, it's the spark that could set the entire thing on fire.
I want you to just stop and think about this question for a second. What single event happening in one specific place on Earth could trigger an immediate and absolutely catastrophic global economic heart attack? The answer, it turns out, is terrifyingly simple.
The answer is hidden inside this one number, 90%. Just let that sink in.
So what does that 90% actually represent? It's the share of the world's most advanced semiconductors that are manufactured by a single company, TSMC, in a single place, Taiwan. Now, given that Beijing considers the self-governing island a rogue province, this concentration isn't just a supply chain problem. It is, without a doubt, the world's most dangerous geopolitical flashpoint. A conflict there wouldn't just be some regional war, it would shut down the entire global economy overnight.
And this is why the situation has become so incredibly tense. The political rhetoric from both Washington and Beijing is at a fever pitch. The US has been ramping up its informal military support for the island, which is deliberately testing Beijing's red lines. In response, Beijing's training exercises have become almost constant, and they look more and more like rehearsals for a full-scale blockade, making a military presence that was once unthinkable feel normal.
So let's zoom out for a second, because the consequences of this rift go way beyond tech labs in the Taiwan Strait. What we're really witnessing is the birth of a bipolar world, where the diplomatic gap between these two superpowers just gets wider every single day.
And this has kicked off a huge battle of global narratives. The US, with its maximum pressure trade policies, is seen by a lot of countries as a pretty unpredictable ally. At the same time, you have President Xi positioning China as the adult in the room, trying to present a stable alternative for nations in the Middle East, in Europe, really anywhere they're looking for a more reliable partner.
Look, this tectonic shift away from one big, globalized world, it comes with real, tangible costs for all of us. First, there's the economic cost. As all these supply chains break apart, prices for everything you buy are going to go up. Then, there's the scientific cost. With research split between two camps, progress itself slows down. And finally, you've got the geopolitical cost, as nations all over the world are increasingly being forced to pick a side.
It's all summed up perfectly by this one line from an analysis of the situation. The era of trust is gone. What remains is a high-stakes game of chicken where the stakes are nothing less than global peace. That, right there, is the stark reality we're all facing today.
So, where does all this leave us? As we try to navigate this brand new world, it really all boils down to one final, incredibly important question.
The question for the coming years isn't whether this huge rift between the US and China can ever be healed. The real question is whether it can be managed without the rest of the world falling right into the crack. And that is what everyone is going to be watching.